Authorities say the boy's mother kidnapped him 7 years ago. Fox 5's Kim Leffler joins us live in studio with more on how Colorado deputies, Kim, were able to find him.
Yeah, the Douglas County, Colorado sheriff says when deputies responded to a trespassing call, felt something wasn't right, they investigated further. They discovered one of the kids with the adults at that scene was Adull Aziz Khan, last seen here in Atlanta in 2017.
And then when it appeared that the father was going to get full custody, that is when the mother left with the child.
Adull Aziz Khan, found after 7 years. 3:37 p.m., February 23, 2025. Highlands Ranch, Colorado, a quiet suburb about 20 miles south of Denver. A homeowner, checking security footage remotely on a vacant property listed for sale, sees two people who shouldn't be there. He calls it in as a trespassing call. Nothing more dramatic than that. Douglas County Sheriff's deputies arrive, expecting exactly what the call describes. Squatters maybe, or kids messing around in an empty house. Instead, they find two children sitting in a car parked in the driveway. Moments later, a man and a woman walk out of the house, telling deputies they're with the real estate agent, just showing the property. It takes 4 hours of careful, methodical work, checking names, running records, working through inconsistencies in the couple's story, before deputies get an answer nobody in that driveway expected. The woman has an active warrant for kidnapping from 2017 out of Atlanta, Georgia. The older child in that car is 14 years old now. He was 7 the last time anyone outside this small circle saw him. His name is Adull Aziz Khan. And after 7 years, thousands of miles of searching, and a case that once captured national attention on Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries, he had just been found. This is one of those rare true crime cases with an ending that isn't a tragedy. Before we get into it, if you're new here, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if true crime cases like this one matter to you, hit subscribe because we cover a case every week. I want to be upfront about something with this one. Aziz Khan is a real 14-year-old who is, right now, going through the process of reconnecting with a father he hasn't seen in 7 years. His family has publicly asked for privacy while they do that. So this isn't going to be a documentary that speculates about what his life was like during those hidden years, or invents scenes we don't actually have any record of. What we can walk through, accurately, is the custody dispute, the disappearance, the 7-year search, and the ordinary, almost accidental way this case finally broke open. Let's get into it. Adull Khan is a pulmonologist, a physician who works in intensive care units, treating some of the most critically ill patients in the hospital. He met Rabia Khalid through a family introduction while both were in school in Alabama. By his account, they were drawn to each other partly because they shared strong personalities. Each knew what they wanted and wasn't shy about pursuing it. A few years later, they married. When their son was born in 2010, the family gave him the name Adull Aziz Khan, and he went by his middle name, Aziz, throughout his childhood. The family initially lived with Abdull's parents in New Orleans, Louisiana. According to Abdull's later account, Rabia had a difficult time getting along with his parents during that period, and it became clear fairly quickly that the arrangement wasn't sustainable. The couple moved out and found their own place in New Orleans. The marriage didn't last. Adull and Rabia separated in 2014, when Aziz was not quite 4 years old. Sometime after the separation, Rabia relocated with Aziz from New Orleans to Atlanta, Georgia, for a new job opportunity. Despite the distance, Adull stayed actively involved. He traveled regularly to Atlanta to see his son, and brought Aziz back to Louisiana for family visits. What followed was a custody dispute that played out in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana, and grew increasingly contentious over the following years. According to Adull's account, and details later compiled by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the custody dispute escalated significantly, roughly a year into the proceedings. Court-appointed custody evaluators reviewed the situation and ultimately recommended that Adull be granted primary custody. Their assessment was that Rabia was not allowing Adull the time with Aziz that he was legally entitled to, and that a change in the custody arrangement was in the boy's best interest. According to Adull, when Rabia learned that recommendation was coming, she went to the courts with serious allegations against him and his family, allegations he has described as baseless. He believes the purpose was to delay the court's evaluation process. What followed was described as a whirlwind. Multiple attorneys became involved, and an investigation stretching roughly a year and a half unfolded. During that extended period, Adull was largely unable to see his son, who remained with Rabia in Atlanta. As the proceedings dragged on, Adull and his family learned that Rabia had begun a relationship with Elliot Blake Bourgeois, described as a friend from her college years. By November 2017, the case was approaching resolution. A custody hearing was scheduled in Atlanta for November 27, 2017, and by that point, according to NCMEC's later account of the case, it had become clear that Rabia was likely to lose custody of Aziz. If you're finding the build-up to this case as tense as I am, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps a case like this reach more people. Back to Atlanta. Rabia did not appear at that hearing. Around the Thanksgiving holiday that same week, she and Elliot Bourgeois sold their vehicles in the Atlanta area. Their social media accounts went dark. According to a U.S. Marshal who later worked the case, the two simply stopped showing up to work one day without any warning to employers or, apparently, to anyone else in their lives. In the language investigators would later use, they fell off the map entirely, taking 7-year-old Aziz with them. What followed was, for years, a case with almost nothing to work with. No confirmed sightings, no financial footprint. The couple had reportedly gotten rid of their phones and deleted their online accounts, cutting off the digital trail investigators would normally rely on. It took time for the legal machinery to fully engage. In December 2019, roughly 2 years after Aziz disappeared, a felony kidnapping warrant was formally issued for Rabia Khalid by the Kenner, Louisiana Police Department, reflecting the jurisdiction connected to the family's earlier residence. In 2020, the U.S. Marshals Service formally took over the investigation, bringing federal resources to a case that had, until that point, been primarily worked at the local level. The Marshals' involvement mattered. Their missing child unit specializes in exactly this kind of long-term parental abduction case, and over the following years, they searched across 11 different states trying to track down Rabia, Elliot, and Aziz. NCMEC released updated age progression images over this period, showing what Aziz might look like as he grew older. Age 11, then 13. Each one an attempt to keep him recognizable to a public that had largely moved on from a story that, by its nature, offered no dramatic developments to sustain ongoing news coverage. It's worth understanding what the Marshals' Missing Child Unit actually does differently from local law enforcement, because the distinction explains why federal involvement so often becomes the turning point in cases like this one. The unit was established specifically to handle cases where a child has been missing for an extended period and where the abductor is believed to have crossed state lines, since local police departments typically lack both the jurisdiction and the specialized resources to pursue a suspect across multiple states over years. Deputy marshals assigned to these cases work in coordination with MECIC, cross-referencing financial records, employment databases, school enrollment systems, and vehicle registration data across state boundaries. Work that requires interagency cooperation, a single county sheriff's office simply isn't equipped to manage on its own. The unit has a track record of recovering children years, and in some cases decades, after their initial disappearance, precisely because it treats these cases as permanently open rather than allowing them to go cold simply because leads dry up in the short term. That institutional patience is part of what separates a case like this one from ones that never get resolved at all. Someone, somewhere in the federal system, keeps the file open and keeps checking it against new data indefinitely. NCMEC released updated age progression images over this period, showing what Aziz might look like as he grew older. Age 11, then 13. Each one an attempt to keep him recognizable to a public that had largely moved on from a story that, by its nature, offered no dramatic developments to sustain ongoing news coverage. These images aren't rough guesses. They're produced by forensic artists trained specifically in age progression techniques, using established craniofacial growth patterns, family photographs of parents and siblings at comparable ages, and in some cases genetic information, to produce images accurate enough that they've directly led to recognitions and tips in other long-term missing children cases across the country. That's one of the genuine, structural difficulties with family abduction cases as a category, and it's worth naming directly. Unlike stranger abductions, family abduction cases typically don't carry the same immediate sense of physical danger to the public, which makes sustaining national attention over years significantly harder, even though the harm to the child and the left-behind parent is entirely real. NCMEC's own leadership would later describe this exact tension when discussing Aziz's case. In family abduction cases, it can be difficult to generate public attention, but doing so is often essential, since a child in this kind of case could genuinely be anywhere in the country. In 2022, Aziz's case reached a new audience entirely. Netflix's revived Unsolved Mysteries series featured his disappearance in an episode, walking through the custody history, the disappearance, and a direct appeal to viewers. If you have any information about Aziz Khan, Rabia Khalid, or Elliot Bourgeois, contact NCMEC or the U.S. Marshals. Millions of people watched. Tips came in, as they typically do after this kind of exposure. None of them led directly to a recovery in the following months. But the exposure did something less immediate and, as it turned out, more important. It kept the case circulating in the public's memory, years after the initial disappearance had otherwise faded from the news cycle. The Unsolved Mysteries platform has a documented track record on exactly this front. Several previous cases featured on the show, both in its original run and its Netflix revival, have led to breaks years after episodes originally aired, because the format reaches a very different, much broader audience than local news coverage or NCMEC's own channels typically do on their own. A viewer with no direct connection to Atlanta, Georgia, no reason to have ever seen a missing child flyer from 2017, could encounter Aziz's story for the first time in 2022, retain the basic outline of it, and years later recognize a detail, a name, or a face, without necessarily connecting it back to where they first learned about the case at all. That kind of delayed recognition effect is one of the primary reasons NCMEC and the Marshals actively pursue media partnerships like this one, for cases that have otherwise gone quiet, even when there's no expectation of an immediate tip. I want to sit with this for a second, because it's one of the more important structural points in this whole case. The 2022 episode didn't crack the case open on its own. What it did was plant something. A face, a name, a story, that stayed dormant in enough people's memory that, years later, when a set of deputies in a Colorado suburb needed to figure out who they were dealing with, the pieces were there to be recognized. If that kind of long-game persistence is the reason you keep coming back to these cases, let me know in the comments. For nearly 3 more years after that episode aired, the case went quiet again. NCMEC's database stayed active. The Marshals kept the warrant current. And somewhere, under circumstances investigators still don't have a complete picture of, Rabia, Elliot, and Aziz kept moving. We return now to where we started, the trespassing call in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. Douglas County Sheriff Darren Weekly later described what deputies encountered as a remarkable story, and the sequence of events bears that out. The vacant home on Kellywood Way had a homeowner monitoring it remotely through security cameras, a fairly ordinary precaution for anyone trying to sell an empty property. When that homeowner spotted 2 people entering the house without permission, he called it in as a straightforward trespassing complaint. Deputies arriving on scene found 2 children sitting in a parked car in the driveway. Shortly afterward, a man and a woman came out of the house and told deputies they were associated with the real estate agent handling the sale. According to the sheriff's office, that story began to unravel almost immediately, once deputies started asking follow-up questions. It took roughly 4 hours of sustained work, checking names against records, cross-referencing details, working through inconsistencies in the pair's account, before deputies had their answer. The woman was identified as 40-year-old Rabia Khalid. She had an active warrant for kidnapping her own son in Atlanta, Georgia, back in November 2017. The man was identified as 42-year-old Elliot Blake Bourgeois. The older of the 2 children in the car was Adull Aziz Khan, 14 years old now, having been 7 the last time his father had seen him. CTA #3. Reflective, different tone. I want to be honest about how ordinary this discovery actually was, because I think that's worth sitting with, rather than glossing over. This wasn't a high-speed chase, or a dramatic raid, built on months of surveillance. It was a homeowner glancing at a security camera feed and deciding something looked off enough to make a phone call. If a detail like that, how much can turn on one person paying attention, is the kind of thing that stays with you after a case like this? Drop a comment. I read every one. Both Khalid and Bourgeois were arrested and booked into the Douglas County Jail. The charges reflect an interesting legal nuance that 23rd Judicial District Attorney George Brauchler addressed directly with reporters. Khalid herself was not charged with kidnapping because, in his words, one of the nuances of the law is that you cannot kidnap your own child. Instead, she faced 9 charges, 7 of them felonies, including conspiracy to kidnap, false reporting of identifying information to law enforcement, forgery, being a fugitive from justice, and first-degree criminal trespass of a dwelling. Bourgeois, who is not Aziz's biological parent, faced no such legal exemption. He was charged with 14 counts, 12 of them felonies, including kidnapping, fraud, and identity theft, among other charges. Bond was set at $1 million each. This legal distinction, a biological parent cannot be charged with kidnapping their own child under Colorado law, even in a case this serious, isn't unique to this case or this state. It reflects a legal principle found across most U.S. jurisdictions, rooted in the idea that kidnapping statutes were historically written around the concept of someone with no legal relationship to a child taking them, rather than a custody dispute between parents. Instead, most states, Colorado included, address parental abduction through separate statutes entirely: custodial interference, violation of custody orders, or in Colorado's case here, charges like conspiracy to kidnap, criminal trespass, and fraud, which together can carry penalties just as serious as a kidnapping charge would, without technically being labeled as one. It's a distinction that often confuses the public, since two people can commit what looks, functionally, like the exact same act, removing a child and hiding them for years, and end up facing entirely different categories of charges depending on their legal relationship to that child. In this case, that gap explains why Bourgeois, despite arguably playing a supporting role to Rabia's decision to flee, ended up facing more charges, and more severe ones, than she did. Sheriff Weekly noted that investigators believed the couple had been living somewhere in the Aurora, Colorado area and had executed a search warrant on a residence there believed to be connected to them. Beyond that, significant questions remained unanswered at the time of the initial press conference, including how long the family had actually been in Colorado and whether Aziz had been attending school under his real name or an assumed one. Investigators were candid that they simply didn't know yet, and some of those specifics may never become fully public, out of respect for the ongoing legal process and the family's privacy. Both children found at the scene, Aziz and a younger child whose identity authorities have not publicly released, were taken into protective custody. Officials confirmed both children appeared to be in good physical health. Word of Aziz's recovery reached his father, Abdul Khan, the same day. After more than 7 years of an active missing persons case, he learned that his son had been found alive and was safe. The family's public response, released through NCMEC, was brief and measured. We're overwhelmed with joy that Aziz has finally been found. We want to thank everyone for their support over the last 7 years. We specifically want to recognize the Douglas County Sheriff's Office for their exceptional work in solving this case. Now, as we navigate the next steps, we ask for privacy so that we can move forward as a family and heal together. John Bischoff III, Vice President of NACMEC's Missing Children Division, echoed that sentiment publicly. We know family reunifications can be challenging. As Aziz and his family reconnect and heal, NACMEC will continue to support them. We're going to respect that request for privacy here, the same way the family asked the public to. What we can say, generally, is something child welfare professionals who specialize in long-term family abduction cases have described in broad terms, without reference to any specific family. Reunification after years of separation is rarely simple. A child who was 7 when he disappeared and is now a teenager has spent the intervening years forming an identity, routines, and relationships under circumstances his other parent knows little about. Experts in this field typically emphasize patience, professional support, and avoiding pressure on the child to immediately explain or process everything that happened, allowing trust and connection to rebuild at whatever pace actually works for that specific family. Beyond the family's own brief statement, we don't have and won't speculate about further details of what that process has looked like for Aziz and his father specifically. That's exactly what the family asked for, and it's a reasonable thing to ask. If this case gave you a rare moment of relief in a genre that doesn't always end this way, let me know in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe. We bring you a real story like this one every week. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, family abductions, cases where a parent or relative takes a child without legal permission, make up the large majority of missing children reports filed in the United States each year, far outnumbering abductions by strangers. Most of these cases resolve relatively quickly, within days, weeks, or a few months, typically through court enforcement, mediation, or a voluntary return once legal pressure builds. It's worth spending a moment on what actually predicts whether a family abduction case resolves quickly or drags on for years, because there are recognizable patterns. Cases involving a parent who has already exhausted legal options and is facing an unfavorable custody ruling, exactly as Rabia was in November 2017, carry a higher risk of escalating into a long-term disappearance, since the abducting parent has strong motivation to avoid any future legal process altogether, rather than simply delaying it. Cases where the abducting parent has access to cash, is willing to abandon employment and identification tied to their real name, and has a partner willing to relocate repeatedly, tend to be harder to resolve quickly because nearly every standard investigative tool, bank records, employment verification, utility bills, depends on someone using their real identity somewhere in the process. Family law attorneys and child advocacy organizations generally recommend that parents in high-conflict custody situations document any pattern of violated visitation agreements, sudden unexplained relocations, or asset liquidation, and raise concerns with the court and, where appropriate, law enforcement before a final custody ruling is issued, rather than after a child has already disappeared. The cases that stretch into years, like this one, are considerably rarer, but they carry a particular kind of harm that's easy to underestimate precisely because they don't involve the same immediate physical danger that defines stranger abduction cases. A child in a long-term family abduction may grow up disconnected from an entire side of their family, potentially under a false identity, with a childhood built around routines designed specifically to avoid detection. What ultimately made the difference in this case wasn't one dramatic breakthrough. It was the accumulation of several separate things, holding steady over 7 years. A father who stayed engaged with investigators and never let the case go quiet on his end. NCMEC's sustained case management and updated age progression images. The U.S. Marshals' persistent, multi-state search once they took over the investigation in 2020. The national visibility the 2022 Unsolved Mysteries episode provided, even without an immediate breakthrough, and, in the end, an ordinary act of attention from a homeowner checking a security camera on a house that wasn't even his own family's. For families currently living through a similar situation, NCMEC offers free case management services, poster and age progression support, and reunification resources, and the U.S. Marshals Service maintains dedicated capacity for exactly this kind of long-term recovery effort. Peer support groups, including organizations built specifically for left-behind parents, connect people going through this specific, isolating form of grief, knowing a child is very likely alive while having no way to reach them. And for anyone watching this who isn't personally connected to a case like this at all, this story is, in its own way, a case for paying attention to the ordinary details of your own surroundings. Nobody solved this case through extraordinary detective work. A neighbor noticed something that didn't look right on a security camera and made a phone call. That's the entire mechanism that ended a 7-year search. It's worth remembering that the next time something looks slightly off, and the easiest thing to do is assume it's nothing. Abdul Aziz Khan is home. If you have any information related to unresolved family abduction cases in your area, NCMEC's hotline and local law enforcement are always the right place to start. If this case affected you, share it. And if you're new here, subscribe. We cover real stories every week.